The North Pole. Why is it so important for the planet? When you hear the expression North Pole, what comes to your mind? Maybe a completely white place, covered in ice, silent. Or perhaps polar bears slowly walking across floating ice sheets. Some people even immediately think of Santa Claus's home. But now I want to ask you an important question. Have you ever stopped to think about why a place so far away from most of us is absolutely essential for life on Earth? Today, we're going to travel together to the very top of the planet to understand why the North Pole is not just a remote location, but a key piece in the climatic, environmental, and even economic balance of the world. Where exactly is the North Pole? First of all, let's clear something up, and this is quite interesting. The North Pole is not a continent like Antarctica. It is located in the middle of the Arctic Ocean, surrounded by countries such as Canada, Russia, Greenland, the United States, Norway, and Iceland. In other words, the North Pole is, most of the time, a vast layer of ice floating on the ocean. Here's a fascinating curiosity. If you were standing exactly at the North Pole and took a few steps in any direction, you would automatically be walking south. Strange, right? An extreme environment, but full of life. At first glance, the North Pole may seem like a hostile place, almost lifeless. Temperatures can drop to -40 degrees Celsius. There are long periods of darkness during winter and months of constant sunlight in summer. And yet, even in this extreme environment, life finds a way. The region is home to polar bears, seals, walruses, whales, as well as migratory birds and indigenous peoples such as the Inuit, who have lived in harmony with this environment for thousands of years. Let me ask you, can you imagine what it would be like to live in a place where the sun doesn't rise for months, or where it never sets? The North Pole as the planet's air conditioner. Now we reach one of the most important points. The North Pole acts as a gigantic thermal regulator for Earth, a kind of natural air conditioner. The Arctic ice reflects a large portion of sunlight back into space. This phenomenon is called albedo. The more white ice there is, the more sunlight is reflected. The less ice there is, the more heat is absorbed by the dark ocean. And here's the critical detail. When the ice melts, the ocean absorbs more heat, which speeds up warming even further. It's a dangerous cycle. Now think about this. What happens to the rest of the planet when this air conditioner starts to fail? Impacts on the global climate. What happens at the North Pole does not stay at the North Pole. Cold air currents from the Arctic directly influence the climate of North America, Europe, and even Asia. Storms, heat waves, prolonged droughts, and extreme winters are increasingly linked to changes happening in this region. You may have heard about out-of-season weather events, intense heat in winter, extreme cold in summer, rain in places that used to be dry. Well, many scientists point to the weakening of Arctic ice as one of the main causes of this climate chaos. Ice that stores Earth's history. Another fascinating curiosity, the ice at the North Pole works as a natural archive of the planet. Layer upon layer of ice contains air bubbles from thousands of years ago. These bubbles allow scientists to study what the Earth's atmosphere was like in the past. It's as if the North Pole were a climate time machine. And that leads to an important question. If we lose this ice, what part of Earth's history will we never be able to recover? The North Pole and sea levels. Many people think that when the ice at the North Pole melts, it directly raises sea levels. In reality, since most of this ice is already floating, the direct impact is smaller than that of Antarctica. However, pay attention. Melting Arctic ice affects ocean currents, which influence sea levels in many parts of the world. In addition, warmer oceans expand, contributing to global sea level rise. Coastal cities, islands, riverside communities. Have you ever thought about how many people could be affected by something happening so far away? Economic and political interests. As the ice melts, new shipping routes are opening in the Arctic. Shorter routes between continents that can reduce travel time and costs. It's also estimated that the region holds vast reserves of oil, natural gas, and valuable minerals. So this turns the North Pole into a geopolitical chessboard. Countries compete for influence, territory, and access to these resources. And here's a key reflection. Could economic interests accelerate the destruction of an environment so vital to the planet? Indigenous peoples and the North Pole. We cannot talk about the North Pole without talking about the people who live there. Indigenous Arctic communities depend directly on the ice to hunt, travel, and keep their cultures alive. As the ice melts earlier each year and forms later each year, ancient traditions are under threat. What happens to a culture when the environment that sustains it begins to disappear? Why does the North Pole matter to you? You might be thinking, okay, this is all interesting, but what does this have to do with me? The answer is simple: everything. The North Pole influences your climate in your city, food prices, the frequency of extreme weather events, sea levels, the overall balance of the planet. Even if you never set foot there, the North Pole affects your life every single day. The future of the North Pole. Scientists warn that if the current pace continues, we could see nearly ice-free Arctic summers within the next few decades. This is not a distant future. It could happen within our lifetime. So I'll leave you with a few final questions to reflect on. What kind of planet do we want to leave for future generations? How much are we willing to change our habits to protect something that feels so far away? Is there still time to reverse part of this process? Closing. The North Pole is not just a point on a map. It is a silent guardian of Earth's balance. Understanding its importance is the first step towards respecting it and protecting it. The next time you feel an abrupt change in the weather or hear about global warming, remember, at the top of the world, the North Pole is sending us signals. The question is, are we ready to listen?